We're in the north of Poland today, just a couple of hours from Gdansk, and it's a grey, miserly day, but the reason we're here is for a boat that's likely to brighten the mood, because the story of Aquador in recent years has taken a bit of a turn. It was acquired by the Nimbus Group in 2018, and they set about making it more modern, giving it more international appeal. So they launched the next generation hardtop series in the form of the 250 and the 300. Well, the boat we're here to see today is not going to be launched until Düsseldorf in a month or two, but it's the largest boat in that line, and in fact the largest boat Aquador has ever built. And this is it. This is the all-new Aquador 400 HT. Now, although this is an entirely new boat, it does, of course, inherit the same kind of design principles that were laid down by the first boats, by the 250 and the 300 HT. So what we see here is a relatively plumb bow and a beam forward design with quite bulbous forward hull quarters, which gives you loads of volume down below, and all the more so because we've got elevated hull sides, loads of volume for the cabins. But we also have relatively narrow side decks, which means pretty much the entire 13-foot beam, and that's a generous beam in its own right, is all used for the day spaces in that internal saloon. And as for the aesthetic, well, that again is quite attractive. On the face of it, when you're going for volume, you can end up with quite a lofty, top-heavy looking boat, but because we have those elevated hull sides, well, the superstructure itself feels relatively low slung. It's quite a muscular, masculine looking boat. Really good looking boat actually, and we have elongated hull windows here. You see they overlap the upper and the lower tiers. On the 300 they're kind of staggered. So clearly when we get down below we can expect to see pretty good things. Before we do that though, let's start at the back end, because this is really quite attractive. We'll jump on board the swim platform here, though there are some extra boarding points here with good grab rails and additional grab rails on the rooftop. And what we have back here is a fixed platform, very large indeed. We've got a stern anchor here over on the port side. This is of course a Nordic boat, and that tends to be the way they do things up there. We also have a couple of receptacles, which I would assume, though I don't know, are for rods to elevate a sunshade over this aft lounge. We've got a telescopic ladder down here on the starboard side with a little grab rail to pull yourself out of the water. But this is really very attractive indeed. We have an open seating section here beyond the protection of those wraparound canvases at the back end of the saloon that opens directly down onto this platform for lovely views aft, and I reckon that's big enough for 3 or 4 people, so it's a really good size. As you can see, we've got a telescopic table leg, so it drops down into the space, and you can use an infill to create a lovely big sunbed back there. There's our water point and our shore power there on the starboard side, and the seating itself, well, this is of course very pleasant, because this is the inboard version. But if you opt for the outboards, twin outboards here, then what you actually get is the outboards concealed beneath a sunbed section, much in the style of a De Antonio. So unless you knew they were there, you would suspect it were an inboard powered boat. But the way the length has been used on this larger 400 is particularly interesting, because as you'll see if we peek through the canvases and take a look at the saloon, the bulk of the seating runs all the way down the port side, and there are 3 basic parts. We have some raised companion seating to port of that main twin helm, and that's beautifully elevated, gives you extra space down below in the mid cabin, of course, but it also gives you proper views forward when you're underway, even if you run a little nose up. So that's excellent, plenty of space there too. Behind that, a really big C-shaped dinette, with plenty of storage underneath. There's a fridge forward, so none there, but if I lift this up you'll see it's quite easy to do one-handed. Nicely lined space. Another section at the aft end, currently filled with a bulbous fender. And again, a telescopic table, so you can drop that down into the space, turn this into an additional berth, and turn this into an 8-berth boat, supplementing the 3 double berths we have down below. Now, as you can see, we've got the canvases erected at the moment to keep us nice and warm in here, and in the kind of Marex fashion, they come out of these cabinets on either side and slide round the back end here. And the fact that they do so beneath the shelter of this extended roof structure means that they don't get wet even on a day like today, which is a very good means of preserving proper visibility when you're inside the saloon. It's a neat feature, that. And if we move further forward to the port side and take another little look at this companion seating, well, I like this a great deal as well. Now, it's kind of a chaise longue style of arrangement, so you can sit a couple of people facing forward, one facing aft, and there's plenty of space for that. It's a good unit. Or you can grab hold of this, slide this right out, and use it as a proper relaxed chaise longue for a couple of people, directly opposite that twin helm. It's a very attractive feature indeed. And I like the fact we don't need any additional infills or additional cushions that you've got to stow away elsewhere. It's always there ready to rig. And it's a bit of a magic trick actually, that it's so big, because if you look outboard, you see the side decks really aren't that huge, as I mentioned. As for the galley, well, that sits over on the starboard side. It butts up against those helm seats, but there's decent clearance to slide your seats fore and aft, so it's not a problem in terms of the space at the helm. And what we have in here is a little cutlery drawer under that section. We have an extra storage space there. There's your stereo remote, a couple of light switches. We've got a couple of diesel hobs here, and twin sinks, stainless steel, further aft. It's nicely put together, very pale woods. Plenty of storage down under here of various sizes, and a dedicated place to put your condiments, which you don't always get on boats like this. You do on the 250 and the 300, so it's good to see that particular feature make its way onto the larger boat. And as for the fridge, well, that's what you get just under there. It's good to see there's no full height fridge, because you don't want to be blocking out your view, and that's a pretty cavernous piece of work anyway, particularly when you bear in mind that you also have the slide out fridge beneath that port dinette. But of course, all this scale, all this volume, as I say, means that those side decks have to be relatively narrow. So let's see how they perform, because on the smaller boats, narrow though they are, they do a pretty good job. And it seems to me that the same is true here. Let's step up onto them. You'll see that the steps are not huge, kind of the size of my outstretched hand. Big enough though. And as we make our way up onto the side deck, if I look down at my feet, you'll see it's about the width of a couple of feet, so substantially wider actually than on the smaller 300. And although we have little gutters that stick out a little to drain the water away from the aft cockpit, aside from that, there's very little to get in your way. The roof line is very trimmed in, very narrow. On a boat like Wellcraft's latest Explorer vessels, you see the roof line extend a decent way out and kind of push you outboard, but this is much, much better. As you can see, the rails come up to a good sort of height just above the knee. There are grab rails on the rooftops, and the cleats are kept well out of the way, kind of in the gap between the tow rails. So even though they're quite narrow, it does feel very secure. And when you get up to the bow space, where you get that walk around deck, all single level, and you also get precisely what you'd expect, which is another substantially raised moulding, again to factor in extra volume down in that forward cabin. You can of course cover that in cushions, use it as a sunbed. Not so today because it's wet and it's cold. So what we'll do is make our way back down the port side. As you can see, it does stick out a touch. You need to be careful with your hip as you're going past here. But again, you do have grab rails up top, guardrails down by your knee, and a tow rail for your foot. And the steps here, as you can see, because we get access to the saloon on the starboard side, the steps here are much, much wider. But let's make our way back round to the starboard side and into the saloon, head forward and down to that lower deck and see exactly what all that hard work up top has done for the volume down below. Now, as you'd expect, we access it to the port side of the helm through a sliding door. And when we get down in here, well, again, this is pretty much what you would expect. Loads of volume, and they've been careful to maximise that space, that sense of space, the sense of light, by eradicating any bulkheads. It's entirely open plan. So what we get here is some storage on the port side, some shelves and some hanging storage there. There's our heads compartment on the starboard side, which also of course operates as the day heads. Behind me we've got two doors, one on the starboard side, one on the port side, and that gives you access to two cabins, two double berths, which kind of split the beam across there beneath the saloon deck. We'll have a look at those in a second. First up though, we'll take a look at the owner's bed. Now for a start, it's a very good size, and the fact that the mattress is split in two there with a little hinge suggests that we ought to be able to lift this up. That's exactly what we can do, and the storage in there is fantastic. Beautifully lined. There's the battery, presumably for your bow thruster. But this is pretty cavernous, very welcome, and again it's a one-handed operation to open and close it. The bed is lined with little cushioned bits on the bulkheads just to keep you comfortable at night, and the sheer elevation here at the head end of the bed is very impressive. I'll climb on there and spin the camera around just to give you a sense of how lofty that is, and if I reach up I can just about touch the deck head. It feels enormous, and if I look to the side, well look, even these side decks, the walkways, as they work their way around that island sunbed, they don't get in the way at all. And actually they're used for some inset LEDs, which is a nice way to do it. There's those hull windows we noticed earlier, quite long and panoramic before plunging further aft. We've got another little hatch in here, that's just for small bits and bobs. And if we jump down back into this atrium, we got a little changing seat on the port side with some more storage underneath, just a little drawer. But let's spin around and face the starboard side, because arguably this heads compartment is even more impressive. Just look at the scale of that. As you can see, it does inhabit the space where we begin to taper towards that forepeak. So there's some interesting angles at play, but the space is beautifully managed. There's room for a separate toilet forward with a neat little shelf and a towel rail above that, and another one of these little storage spaces built into the bulkhead. Behind that is a good size of sink, a lovely size of window, and a mirror up top. And then we have a separate shower aft. As you can see, we've got a little bit of ventilation there. No rain shower, not quite the space for that, above that deck head I would imagine. But we do get a fixed screen here and then a runner built into that deck head, so you can hang your shower curtain and keep everything dry. And there's a little seat down below, again with some neat little storage in there. So that really is beautifully done. And the fact that we only have one heads compartment, as I say, means we've got space for two cabins beneath that saloon. So let's check out the port one first. In we go. Once again, we've got a changing seat at the entry point, and you see the deck head plunges and plunges again as the furniture does so up in that saloon. But there's plenty of space here for a really good size of double bed. And windows are not in short supply either. Low level windows for lovely views from bed, and a high level window here with an opening section for a bit of extra ventilation. If I spin the camera around, you'll see we also have a decent little bit of storage too. Not vast and no hanging storage, but it's a pretty good effort given that it only inhabits half of that 13-foot beam. So let's head over to the starboard side and see how that works out. Now, while that port cabin occupies the space beneath the furniture on the port side of the saloon, while this starboard cabin occupies the space beneath that helm console. So we get extra vertical elevation, which is well used for a larger storage cabinet, but we get a smaller changing seat because the aft bulkhead for that heads compartment gets in the way of that. And yet we do have another very good size of bed, plus three well-sized windows, precisely as we see on the port side, with ventilation as well. So it's a very handy sleeping spot for guests. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, can we eradicate that central bulkhead, turn this into a completely open plan, full beam space, so it's a 2-cabin boat instead of a 3-cabin boat? And the answer to that from Aquador is a resounding no, because as you can see, the deck in this saloon drops pretty deep, which limits the vertical space down here. So this 400 HT will remain a 3-cabin boat, and for my money it does that pretty well. Let's just head aft and take a look at the engine compartment, which, as you'd expect on the inboard model, is accessed at the back end of this saloon through a little hatch. I say little hatch, it's a decent size, and it's equipped with a ladder and proper checker plate there, and there's our fuel filters on the starboard side with an easy reach. And when we jump down inside there, well, there are our engines, a pair of Volvo D4-320s hooked up to stern drives. As you can see, there's not a great deal of space for them. Well, I should say not a great deal of space left, but of course if you need major works or servicing, you can lift up this tray above them, get proper access. Aside from those, all we have in here is the calorifier on the port side and your master volt gear over on the starboard side, which leaves plenty of space for other things, little extras like your generator or your seakeeper. What I really like is you've got options there too. Because this bulkhead for the engine bay stops a good way aft, we've got a nice big transverse space beneath the deck, which looks like a huge storage space. It could be used for exactly that. But as you can see, if we climb down in here, it's a dedicated engineering compartment, which really enables you to arrange the kit on board this boat as you see fit. There's lots of flexibility. All it lacks, in fact, is a couple of good strong rams, because as you can see at the moment, to keep it open, I'm having to use one arm. That then is the new Aquador 400 HT, and I think that's a really cool boat. In all honesty, I thought the smaller boats were pretty cool too, the 250 and the 300. They tried an enormous amount on relatively compact platforms, and in spite of some minor design compromises or some early teething troubles, they did an excellent job. But here, in the form of the 400 HT, we're taking all those excellent design ideas and just giving them a bit of extra space to breathe. And the result of all that, for my money, is one of the very best affordable 40-foot sports cruisers money can buy.